Hey there, it's Justin. And this one, we are going to be creating a local web server for a single page application written in JavaScript. In this case, we're going to be using AngularJS, but this same video can be used for React.js or any other sort of JavaScript library that you might be using. There are other ways to go about doing what we're about to do, but this in particular works really well with AngularJS and URL routing. If you want to learn more about that, definitely check out our video in the Try AngularJS 1.5 version on joincfe.com/projects. But without further ado, let's actually jump into this. Again, we're going to be using AngularJS, and that's using 1.5. The actual version number shouldn't matter that much because of what Angular does or what any JavaScript library does is it pretty much works in the browser for us. So we actually have to set up a server or a local host on our computer to emulate what it would be like if it was on a live server. We're not setting up a live server, we're just emulating it on our local one. This is really good for all sorts of testing. Now we're actually going to be following a guide on our GitHub page that is on joincfe.com/guides, or you could go to joincfe.com/github and navigate to the guides themselves. And we're going to be doing the Angular web server with rack guide. Of course, this is a JavaScript web server, so really it could be called a JavaScript web server guide as well. We may change the title, but just so you know, it's either going to be AngularJS web server guide or JavaScript web server guide in the future. So what we're going to be doing here is really just following along with this guide. So in this video, we're going to be going step by step with this. We will talk about some of the things and the advantages to doing it this method versus another method. And then we will actually show you guys how to actually get a real project up and running. Now, the project that we're going to be working with is on our Coding for Entrepreneurs, and it's an Angular project, just a very basic, simple project. So you can go ahead and download and clone this project. There's a good chance that we're not going to update this a whole lot. It's going to be pretty static of a project. If we end up using it as a template for all of our future AngularJS projects, then we will definitely update this. But what we're about to do should still work on this in the future. And if it doesn't, please let us know so we can update at least the guide, if not the video as well. Okay, so let's go back into the guide and see what we need to do. First of all, we want to get Homebrew and Ruby installed on our local computer. There's a good chance if you're working on a Mac or Linux, there's a good chance this is already installed for you. So Homebrew, you might have to go a different direction on how this works. And then once we get Brew installed, we're going to use the gems, Ruby gems. It's a package installer essentially to install a package that will allow us to actually have our server emulation happen, or our local web server actually happen. But before we jump into this guide, I do want to mention that there is a way to actually create a web server very simply using Python. So if you have Python installed, you can just do this really quickly. Notice I have Angular web server already downloaded, or I have this actual project already downloaded. So CFE ng template. We already have that project downloaded and it's right in here. If I did go ahead and download it again, I could just click here and then download zip file, unzip it, and then navigate to there in my terminal window. I'm not going to really go through that, but okay, so I'm already in that project. This is this exact same thing that's on our GitHub right now. So I'm going to go ahead and change into the source file, and I'm just going to do python-m, and we're going to do simple HTTP server. Press enter, and now it's serving on port 8000, so we can actually just open up our local host to 8000. We could also just type out local host. There's a few different URLs for local host, but it's working, right? So this is actually an Angular project that's working. Of course, if I just open the index file for this project, nothing shows up. But once I have Angular working, it will actually show that this text right here. So this means that Angular itself is actually working, which is great. But this is not the best way to do it. In fact, we want to have something that's set up and a little bit better for using URL routing. That is, when we go to something like about, it doesn't give us this error response. This is not what we want to see. Instead, we want to see Angular give us some sort of error because, again, it's a single page application. We're not going to be covering the routing or actually doing the /about in this one. Instead, we're just going to be emulating that server. That's the main thing here. So let's go ahead and go through this guide. I'm going to just close out this Python server, the very simple Python server. Again, if you didn't get that command, this is it right here. But let's go ahead and start with Ruby. I'm going to go ahead and copy this right here and paste it in. And what I'll see is that it's already installed. I don't actually need to reinstall it. So if you already have it installed, it's a good chance that you are ready to go. And then we can actually install Ruby itself, brew install Ruby. In this case, I should already have Ruby installed, but if it needs to actually run some installations, that it will. Notice it already updated Homebrew and it did some stuff as well. And then it gave me this last warning that Ruby is already installed. So this means that I can use Ruby gems. So gems allow me to do all sorts of things, such as a Python package installer, or it's similar to a Python package installer, but it's just Ruby's version of it. So I'm going to be copying this. If you're on Windows, you don't need to use sudo. You would just do gem. And to install actual Ruby and all that stuff, you'd go to Windows right there. But let's go ahead and jump here, and I'm going to do install bundler, and of course enter my admin password. This is going to install bundler. What bundler does is it allows us to create what's called a gem file, which then we could just have all of our different requirements for our project. If you've worked in Django or Python before, you will see requirements.txt. Gem file is very similar, but it's related to your various Ruby sort of things that you might be using. In this case, we're just using Ruby's rack gem. So rack is the actual way that we're going to run this server emulation. All right, so let's go ahead and navigate to our project again. I'm going to navigate one back where the license, the README, and the source folder are. And I'm going to make a new file in here. So there's a few ways that you can make this file. Of course, if you're on Mac or Linux, you could just do nano and then type in gem file and press enter. If you're on Windows, the fastest way I've found it is by using a text editor, something like Sublime Text, and creating a new file and coming in here, saving it, and typing out gem file. All right, so that's actually what I'm going to do. I'm going to close out the terminal one and just not make any changes or save anything there. And now I'm going to go ahead and copy what's on here. And I'll explain what's going on here in just a second. And we will just paste this in, save it. So this is a gem file. This is actually something that's going to require, excuse me, this is not the gem file. This is the gem file. Let's go ahead and replace everything there. So this is basically just telling Ruby when we run the next command, hey, go ahead and download and install these things. This is where it's coming from, and this is what it's called. So let's go ahead and just do bundle install. And this will install it on our local computer. This gives us the ability to work with the different gem files on there. See, as it says right now, 2 gems are now installed, and we can show the bundle that was actually installed or the gem that was installed. That's not the only way you could do it. You could also just run it just like what we did before, which was sudo gem install rack. We could actually run it that way, and that's actually the same exact way of doing it, but the reason we use the gem file is to monitor all of the requirements for our specific project. In this case, we just needed rack. Just like any requirements file would need, the gem file kind of takes place of that. Okay, so now that we have rack installed, we actually want to create our web server emulation. So I'm going to make another file called config.ru, and that's for rackup or the rack server emulation. So let's go ahead and back into Sublime Text in this case, but your text editor. You're going to go ahead and open up a new or create a new file. We're going to save this as config.ru. That's the main configuration folder. This is what this next command is actually going to look for. Much like when I did bundle install, it actually looks for the gem file. Bundle install, that command looks for a gem file in your project. Whereas this next command called rackup will look for the config.ru file. Now, you might be wondering, why did I choose to put it where I chose? So this is not 100% required. You don't have to put your gem file and your config.ru file outside of the src folder. But the reason I did this is because when we actually jump into our config.ru and paste in the code that we need, go ahead and copy this and paste it in here. A lot of this stuff starts to be a little bit easier to work with. That is, we can set a root folder where our actual website or web application actually exists. So that's what we're doing here. So we actually put this config.ru outside of the src folder, essentially to run the src folder as our server. And by putting it outside, it allows it to recognize where it is in relation to config.ru. If it was somewhere else, let's say for instance I had ABC here and I wanted to put my source folder in ABC, that is 100% okay. But then what we need to do is change in here, we would have to do ABC/ and then ABC/. And just like that. That's how you're going to want to do it regardless of what system you're on. So you're going to run it just like this, and that will actually run your server as we are about to do. But I'm going to keep it as src, and I'm going to move my project back in there, and I'm going to delete that folder itself. I'll explain everything else in just a second. But now what we're going to do is we're just going to run this and by going rackup. And rackup looks for that config.ru. Notice the port, where the other port, when we were running our server with Python, it was 8000. In this case, it's 9292. So if we go back in here and change this to 9292, we now see that /about is going to hi there, this is working. I get rid of that about, it's still saying hi there, this is working, and all that. So now we actually have a server working in the way we want. But then also when I go to when I go to javascript/angular.min.js, it actually takes me there. Now, why is it doing that versus how the about is doing this, right? So they're both URLs that are being served by Rack. Why are they a little bit different? That has everything to do with this static stuff right here. So when you want to have a directory or folder being served as a static file that is like an image or JavaScript or CSS or even Angular templates, you could do it just like this. This is how you would actually serve those files that are in those directories, right? So we have a JavaScript directory. So in here, we have this JS directory right here. Now, if I wanted images, I would just make an images directory. Sometimes you see images as img, so you could also do that. And then you would just come in here and change this to img or whatever you want to call it. In this case, I'm not going to actually add those because we don't want them. But this is now a way to actually serve our file. The next part is we're actually serving the index file, and that's what this is doing. It's giving us a status code back, it's giving us some headers, and then it's finally opening up that index file. And notice it says read only. So it's actually running that file for us. So now we have it set up where we can start to do URL routing, or we could just really just emulate or test our actual local project, which is really good for all sorts of things. But the other thing that should work is when we change any sort of context. So this is just a little bit more. We save that and we refresh in here. It actually runs those refresh really, really quickly, which is good because that's actually what we also want to see. Cool. Well, thanks for watching this web server with JavaScript video. Of course, check out this guide if you have other questions regarding to the things that are going on here. Some of the stuff we actually kind of just jumped around and over only because we didn't really want to go into too much depth on some of this other things. Really, it's all about getting this Angular server set up. So now what you're ready for is you learning about Angular routing, or just basically learning about Angular in general, or allowing you to test any sort of JavaScript framework. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you in the next one.